Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Edison and Dr. M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I'm Josh Edison. Sitting next to me, as you might expect, is Dr. M. R.X. Dentith. Now, there have been two electoral upsets in the last day or so. One was the Australian government. The other, much more interesting, of course, is Eurovision. Did you watch Eurovision?
No, because the state of Israel and the relationship with the Palestinian territories was a contentious issue for Eurovision this year, so I didn't watch it.
Indeed, and I understand there was a bit of a ban on any sort of political messaging in the performances as well. So I understand it, but not nearly as contentious as the fact that Norway.
So you're going to say that Norway's not winning is more contentious than the Palestinian territories?
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Well, this is awkward.
But no, the Netherlands won and their song was rubbish, is what I'm saying. Couldn't even we heard they won and we're like, which song was the Netherlands song? And then heard it sung again and we're like, yeah, it's not ringing any bells. Forgettable bollocks, that's what I say.
That's Eurovision in a nutshell.
Well, but this was especially... But I mean, like, Lordi won one year. The Scandinavian people dressed up as monsters metal band. Like, sometimes... Last year was... The reason why it's hosted in Israel, of course, is because the winner of the previous year hosts the next year's competition. So last year was the Israeli singer whose song involved clucking like a chicken. So they do, it's not always boring middle-of-the-road bollocks, but this time it very much was.
To get us away from talk of Eurovision and back to a much more important political upset, such as the Australian one, did Australia have a entry in the competition this year?
They did, because they do. Well, I can't remember I think it's just because Eurovision was really big in Australia, and Australia sort of got invited to be on one year, and then they just gave them...
Australia petitioned to join Eurovision for a long time. Eurovision has no relationship to the European Union, or indeed Europe. It's a brand name, and anyone can enter as long as they're willing to stump up the fees. And Australia now regularly competes in Eurovision, as they do in general elections. And what an upset that turned out to be.
I'll be honest, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to it until afterwards when everyone's like, oh, Labour didn't win and we all thought they were going to.
Yeah, and people did. I mean, someone actually put down a $1 million bet at Ladbrokes on the notion that Labour were going to win the election. In fact, actually one of the betting agencies, because you can bet on elections in Australia. What a wonderful country that is. One of the betting agencies actually paid out 2 days in advance because they're going, well, punters think Labour's going to romp home with 81 seats easily, so why wait for the election? We'll pay out now. And then the coalition government seems to have actually swung the election after all, which is a bad sign for everything, including the Australian environment. Because even though Scott Morrison admits climate change is occurring, he doesn't want there to be any economically detrimental effects, so they're not going to do anything to stop it.
Yep.
Because I'd rather you have cheap power prices than a world to live in 25 years' time.
But at least Tony Abbott got the boot, so that was nice.
I heard, not literally, figuratively,
pictorially,
but graphically
yes.
on TV.
Yes, apparently I've seen a clip from an Australian news show where their choice of graphics for showing things was to have the person's face in a little box on a sort of a stand, and then when it turned out Tony Abbott had lost his seat, a literal CGI robotic-looking sort of boot swung down and kicked his thing off camera, as it were.
So kicked his thing off camera?
Kicked his thing off camera. Kicked
wow,
it right
off. Australian political commentary
They don't mess
really
around
raw.
in Australia, no.
Really, really raw. You know, we should get onto a bit of old political commentary by going to the news. And this week, it's all news.
All news all the time.
All the time. For a rationale which I like to call Josh is an unreliable bastard. Joshua?
That's not unfair. Yes, no, my hectic lifestyle has meant I wasn't around for the usual recording time this week, nor will I be next week. So we're mixing things up a little bit.
And by mixing things up, we've got a trove of news, which we're going to dive into with a bit of a sting right now.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
Yes, so this week the news section and the main content section are the same section.
It's all a
madness.
grand unification. It's an all-encompassing conspiracy, starting off with Julian Assange.
Good old Julian Assange.
Australian,
yes.
don't you know?
Australian.
There we go.
It's
We've
all
got
related.
continuity.
So I understand now he is in custody in London, is he? Because he was initially picked up for bail jumping.
Yes, he's in Choki for 50 weeks for bail jumping.
I don't know the sentence, I just know, but it was bail jumping initially, but now apparently the Swedish authorities are looking to reopen the rape case that he was initially being pursued for, which is why
Now remember,
he
there were
first...
2 allegations of rape, the one of which has basically expired due to a statute of limitation in Sweden, but one of which actually will expire in 2020. Swedish prosecutors have basically reopened the case, and they would like Mr. Assange to go to Stockholm for questioning, and this is leading to what might be a bit of a diplomatic furore. I don't know whether I pronounced that correctly.
I don't actually know.
Furor?
Furor? I don't know.
Maybe? I've heard these. Furore.
It sounds a bit more exotic and European, yes.
In the UK, because of course there are now competing extradition requests, one from Sweden, one from the US, and certain MPs in the British government are saying, well, the Swedish allegations are older and they also run out sooner, so natural justice means Assange should go to Sweden. But of course, if you're tossing up between being pally with one country or another, you might choose big old superpower United States of America rather than good old Scandinavian Sweden, which might be a lovely socialist democratic country, but isn't one of your biggest pals when it comes to invading other countries.
Although it did come down to the Netherlands and Sweden in the Eurovision contest.
I wish no more of this
fine,
Eurovision talk.
Okay, so again, it's just such a fraught case of competing sort of thing. You know, Julian Assange, definitely a bit of a dick. That doesn't mean that he's not being unfairly persecuted in some areas, but the fact that he's being unfairly pursued in some areas doesn't mean he's not being unfairly pursued for some of the other allegations against him. It's all just such a quagmire. I guess all we can sit back and see what happens next.
And one can't help but think that in a choice of countries which are liable to extradite you to the US, the UK or Sweden, the UK has a much longer history of extraditing people to the US than the Swedes do. Maybe he should have just gone to Stockholm, answered that particular case. It's not likely it would have been prosecuted, because even though Sweden, being a much more utopic socialist democratic country than many others, even there the prosecution of rape is actually fairly rare. He could have been back in Australia living his best life without having spent X number of years in an Ecuadorian embassy.
Going slowly crazy from the sounds of things.
Yes, and getting lung disease.
Yes. Oh, well, something less contentious. What have we got next? Oh, Israel. Okay.
Yeah, do you use WhatsApp on your phone?
I do.
Because if you do, you might want to think twice. I mean, I have WhatsApp on my phone as well. It turns out that a particular company called NSO, which is an Israeli company, has been exploiting a vulnerability in WhatsApp that allowed them to infect phones with advanced spyware called Pegasus, developed by NSO. Josh, tell me about how this vulnerability works.
I have no idea. It's in the notes, but it's a buffer overflow in the voice over IP stack, which allows remote coding. Actually, I do know what a buffer overflow is. That's where there's there aren't checks that when you put a certain information into a certain bit of memory, it doesn't check to see whether or not the information you're putting in there is longer than the allowed space, which means you can put more information, which means it spills over into another area of the memory. And so if you're very clever,
code injection,
you can stick a bit of code where it shouldn't be, and so on and so forth. Anyway,
and I know about all this stuff because it's the main way that you put homebrew onto consoles. You find a way to get an overflow, to then do a code injection, and then you can, if you do it the right way, unlock the console, and boom, homebrew. So
there you go. There is they found a buffer overflow and what's so it's not that WhatsApp itself is spyware or anything. That's just
No,
a vulnerability has been discovered in WhatsApp, which is
and
allowed.
this company has used this to spy on others. Now, it's important to know NSO is a group that produces spyware themselves and works with law enforcement agencies. So basically, they've found a way to put their spyware onto people's phones, which they are claiming they're only doing for legal purposes. So law enforcement agencies have said, we want to tap into X or Y, and then NSO goes, well, we've got an exploit that will allow you to do this. What's disturbing about this is that targets, i.e. people that the code injection is working to infect, don't need to answer a call. You just need to do the initial call. It'll cause the overflow, and then the calls often just disappear from logs. So there's no way to then
itself.
go, oh, there's a strange phone number. What's that about? It's quite possible to have an infected phone without ever realizing your phone has been infected.
And an interesting, I just read this morning, Grindr, also the gay Tinder, I guess you call it.
Which is where it comes from, gay Tinder, Grindr.
But where does the R come from?
Your mother.
Right. So yeah, apparently there's a bit of contention around Grindr as well, because now it's apparently wholly owned by a Chinese company, and people are worried about the fact that Grindr, you put in quite a lot of personal information, and in some cases very personal information.
Like a photo of your penis.
And there's a worry that the Chinese government is a lot less shy about compelling companies to hand over what data they have, and so on and so on.
So you're saying the Chinese government is collecting photos of penises?
It's entirely possible. Well, it gets into more disquieting territory when it comes to the fact that it's known that in the US plenty of gay servicemen or servicemen and women and people in the military have been known to use Grindr, and so they're phrasing it more nicely, but essentially the US is suggesting that being gay could be a national security risk if you're in the military, which has got people worrying about the whole, they don't ask, don't tell anymore, do they? You're allowed to be openly gay in the military, in the US military.
You just can't be trans in the military. That's gone
Haven't
away.
gone that far yet, yeah.
Well, no,
sorry, they did go that from the...
And then they took it back.
When I say they haven't gone that far, they haven't gone as far as going back to say don't ask, don't tell or anything
Although,
like that.
there is a suspicion that's going to happen as well.
So, yeah, and this people didn't look quite like the insinuation that, yes, because China owns Grindr, being on Grindr and therefore being gay if in the military is a security risk.
Well, there's also the worry that in particular countries, whether or not you're a service person or not, where there's a social stigma around particular sexual orientations or gender identities, this is the kind of information that could be weaponized by a foreign power for spying purposes, or getting a bit of leverage.
Blackmail was Blackmail's an ugly word, and it came up in that article.
It did. So, yeah, if you're using WhatsApp, please be aware that if you're doing particular things, you might be spied upon.
One would hope a patch will come out fairly quickly now that this has been made public. But
yes, although the question now, of course, is we've found one exploit. The question is how many more exploits there are. And the code base for WhatsApp is private. It's not open or accessible. And of course, this is one of the arguments that open software advocates put forward, which is when you have a code base which is closed, you don't know how many exploitable features there are out there because you can't inspect the code base. So we've found one exploit which suggests there's a little bit of lazy or bad coding in WhatsApp to begin with. There may well be more than one, and we don't really know. It's one of those unknown unknowns. We don't know how many exploits there are out there. We've found one. There could be more.
Yes, so it's all a bit of a worry. I was going to say something lighter. There's certainly a fair amount of Schadenfreude here, but I don't know if it's if it's as funny as it initially appears. So you were probably aware that there was a there was a campaign on GoFundMe to build the wall in the States when it's...
We the people will build the wall. They ran a crowdfunder which got them a whopping $21 million US, which was then to be used to build that wall that Donald Trump had promised, but that pesky Congress was not going to allow to be built, so we, the people, would build the wall, with the breaking of ground meant to be happening on May 1st.
Now it's after May the 1st.
It is. So we've had many days since May the 1st. May the 4th has already been.
It has.
May the 5th. May the 6th.
I could go on.
Until what number?
Well, until the 19th, which is what today is. But yes, no, the point I'm alluding to is that ground has not yet been broken on any citizen-initiated wall building, as far as I'm aware.
But a luxury yacht has been purchased.
Yes. Brian, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Colfage.
Sounds good to me.
It'll do. Bought himself $1 million yacht, which is an interesting thing to happen when you're in charge of a campaign that people have been giving millions of dollars to, and you didn't appear to have millions of dollars initially.
Some of you might be thinking, well, maybe you already had money in the bank, but Brian Colfage is also fairly famous for having lost a lot of money because of Facebook. So his online business basically stuttered and died because of the Facebook marketplace. So he's not someone who's thought to have the kind of money he can splash out on $1 million yacht. And so people are a little bit suspicious that the person who ran the crowdfunding drive for a wall that doesn't appear to be being built has bought a luxury yacht.
So yeah, there's a fair amount of glee among the left of saying, oh look, all these sucker MAGA wearing hat people giving their monies to build this imaginary wall have just fallen for a scam artist. But I mean, it is people giving up their savings and getting taken advantage of by some manner of con person, which, even if you don't agree with them, it's still a little bit of a shit thing to happen.
It is, although I have to say I feel very little sympathy towards people who want to build a wall.
Yes, yeah. No, I don't know about sympathy, but it's still... Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to go, hooray, haha, sucks to them, just because the victims of this con man are of a different political persuasion.
Yes, but it does appear that maybe Brian Colfage has spent money that was meant to go towards building a wall for buying a boat, which is a little bit L. Ron Hubbard, truth be told.
It is actually, yeah.
Because he went off and bought a fleet of boats, taking money from Jack Parton. So, it turns out that certain people, when given money and a job to do, will just buy a boat instead.
Yeah. And in fact, their flagship boat was a bit of a plague boat, as we talked about last week or the week before, I can't remember.
Filled with illness.
So let this be a lesson somehow.
Yes, Magna heading wet, whereas I think I was going to go wet
herring.
Are likely to get the plague if they board a boat.
Yes.
That just follows from exactly what we just discussed.
Yep, a life lesson all round. Now, I guess that this next one is kind of related to a couple of the things we're talking before, because we're talking about the White House. We're also talking about social media. So now this is official, right? This is an official White House thing?
Yes, and I did check this,
Yep.
so I went to the page in question. And yes, it very much
so
is
the
real.
White House has officially launched a tool for social media censorship complaints. So not complaining about being bullied on social media, but complaining about being blocked or banned or deplatformed on social media.
And if you go to the page, it's the first page, the landing page, launch page, but that's not quite right.
Not quite.
Goes. Social media platforms, all caps, should advance, all caps, freedom of speech. Yet too many Americans have seen their accounts suspended, banned, or fraudulently reported for unclear violations, that's in quotes, of user policies. No matter your views, if you suspect political bias cause such an action to be taken against you, share your story with President Trump.
And I mean, there have been cases of people of a leftward persuasion being banned for what seemed like silly, spurious, or at least inconsistent reasoning.
Yeah, in fact, Emily Gorensky, who's a researcher who looks at kind of online radicalization, I believe people tried to get her banned for pointing out that during World War II we killed Nazis.
So there have been those cases, but the main narrative that we tend to see is more alt-right type person is harassing or bullying on Twitter, gets banned, and then starts complaining about their freedom of speech.
For example, all trans people should die, and then you get a complaint, and then they get a 12-hour ban, and then suddenly that's contravention of freedom of speech.
So that seems to be what this thing, especially coming from the particularly alt-righty White House administration, that seems to be more the scenario it's aimed at. So I understand there were some slightly interesting standouts on the page itself.
Yeah, now this isn't in any way conspiratorial, but it does speak to the kind of audience this petition was aimed at. So to submit the form, you have to fill in a CAPTCHA to prove that you are not a robot. And the CAPTCHA asks for the date that the Declaration of Independence was signed. Now, Josh, you and I are not American citizens, and thus are not au fait with the date that is the signing of the year that the Declaration of Independence was signed. Give me a guess as to when it was signed.
17 something.
Can you just give me 4 digits?
1796.
If you put that in, you'd be correct. Give me another 4-digit number.
9827.
Put that in, you'd be correct. Give me another 4-digit number.
This is getting... I see where you're going. We could keep this up literally...
Let's only go for one more.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Would also be correct. It turns out you can put any 4-digit number into that CAPTCHA, and that is when the Declaration of Independence was signed.
Good, I suppose.
Now, that doesn't say much at all, and yet at the same time does seem to indicate that they really want your response, but they're not particularly concerned that you'll actually look up that information. Also, you can't submit a form unless you're a citizen of the US, which is understandable on one level, that you could understand that maybe people like ourselves might decide to troll the form by putting information in there, but at the same time, you might be, say, a green card holder or someone who's
1776, there we go, I just looked it up now.
A permanent, see, so easy to do as
So
well.
easy to do, yeah.
Or a permanent resident of the United States who is also concerned about these things, and you wouldn't be allowed to submit the information. Now, what makes this creepy is that when you get to the end, the fine print says, "We want to keep you posted on President Trump's fight for free speech. Can we add you to our email newsletters so we can update you without relying on platforms like Facebook and Twitter?" It turns out the petition is largely an information gathering exercise in that it's designed to basically get a large email listing for President Trump, which contains your age, your date of birth, but basically
That's
they've
kind
got
of the same thing,
Well, I
yes.
suppose you can put down a year without actually putting down a date of birth, name, and a lot of privately identifiable information, including the question, are you a US citizen, which arguably also might allow people to generate a list of people you might suspect might be illegally living in the US. So it seems to be a rather creepy information gathering exercise designed to rely on the outrage of a certain class of person who is really annoyed that they've been deplatformed by a social media algorithm, and yet seems to be designed to have easy access for the president to get himself re-elected by working on that rage, by emailing people who are going to go, yes, I am one of the deplorables.
So does it actually say anything on the page itself about what is supposedly going to happen?
Not at all.
It's just Trump wants to hear your stories.
Yes.
It doesn't say that we'll do anything about it.
No,
or
not at all. There's no
we'll have a word with Twitter.
Inclination that they're going to do anything. They just want your stories, but also your private information as well.
So again, something that resembles somewhat of a scam being played upon members of Donald Trump's support base, kind of by Donald Trump's people.
Yeah, and we often don't do Trump-related news as well, you know, podcast listeners, because we've kind of burnt ourselves out on Trump, basically the beginning of last year. And at some point we do have to talk about the Mueller report, but we'll get round to that eventually.
I suppose.
I mean, I'm actually more keen to read a book by Kerry Bolton about how the Illuminati control the world than I am to actually sit down and read the Mueller report, truth be told, despite the fact the Mueller report is a much more important text.
Which one's Kerry Bolton? Is he the local guy?
Yeah, yes. The local alt-right scholar.
Right. Oh, well, do it and we can make a book review out of an episode.
We can. Oh, the terror I will have reading that book.
So that's all the news we had down for this episode, and given that the news was the content of that episode, this is kind of the end of this episode.
Unless, of course, you're a patron, at which point there's some bonus news coming up, which is largely about the racism going on at the University of Auckland and related issues about gun control in this country. So that's the bonus content for patrons who are paying even just $1 a month to listen to us go on about news that you, standard listeners, don't get to hear.
But until then, for the rest of you, I guess we'll just say, see you next week. Wink.
Wink indeed, Ulrika. Wink indeed. You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Dr. MRX Dentith, which is written, researched, recorded and produced by Josh and Em. You can support the podcast by becoming a patron via its Podbean or Patreon campaigns. And if you need to get in contact with either Josh or Em, you can email them at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or check their Twitter accounts, monkeyfluids and Conspiracism. And remember, they're coming to get you, Barbara.